All right, welcome back. Let's go ahead and get started on this RGB guessing game application. I'm going to make the HTML file first and the CSS and create this simple grid. So we're not going to style it with the background colors and the fonts and this little nav bar here. We're going to just start simple with 6 squares and give them some background colors, maybe a little spacing between them, but we won't do things like add the rounded corners yet. We're not going to add any of the animations, the fade in and the fade out. All we'll do is get 6 squares, and then we'll add the basic logic of click events and checking if you guess the correct color and so on. So first we need to make an HTML file, which I have here. I called it colorgame.html. We'll add in our HTML here, the boilerplate, give it a title. I'll do color game. Let's go ahead and add in these 6 squares. So I'm going to make them divs. Each one is a div with a class of square, and we'll use that square class to style them later. All right, so we'll do div class equals square, and we don't need to put anything inside of it, and we'll have 6 of those. And then just to make this cleaner, I'm going to put them all inside of another div that we can style later. I'm just going to call it container. So it's not going to do anything up front. Eventually, we'll use it to make the site responsive and to make the grid shrink. For now, it's just going to group them together so we don't just have 6 squares floating around. Okay, so we have our 6 squares here. If we open this up in the browser, colorgame.html, we don't see anything, of course, for a few reasons. One, even though we have 6 divs, they have no width, there's no margin, there's no color, so we don't see anything at all. So we're going to start by styling them very basically. So I need to add in a style sheet. So I'll link to the style sheet first, which I haven't created. Let me make this a little bigger. So I'll call it colorgame.css and save, and then make that file colorgame.css. And the first thing that I'll do is just add a background color to our entire body. So body background color, and the color I'm going to use is a hex code. It is 232323, and save. Make sure that it's connected. Yep, so we get the correct background color. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and start to style our squares. We're going to use the same strategy we used to make the CSS photography portfolio site, where we had that responsive grid of square images. They were all black and white. We're going to use the same idea here. So the way that we're going to do this is each one of these is inside of a container, and they each take up 30% of that container. So the container only goes right around these squares. It's not the entire body here, just around the squares. They take up 30%, and then we have a margin between them on all sides, 1.66%. So that all adds up to be 100% of the container. So we'll do that first. Square width will be 30%. And we can just leave it at that and give them a background. Let's make them purple. And save. And we don't see anything still. And the reason that's happening, I'll show you if we inspect. Our divs are on the page, they're just still empty. What we need to do, last time we had images, and images have some content in them, but these divs are empty. So we're going to add in some space, and we're going to use padding bottom. We could also use padding top though. So padding bottom, and that's also going to be 30%. So if I refresh, okay, we now have 6 squares, although they are all in a line, which is not what we want. We want them to be on the same line. So we need to float them to the left, which is what we did with the image grid as well. So float left and save. We refresh, and now we end up with this massive grid here. I'll go ahead and add the margin in so that you can see what's happening. So we're going to have margin 1.66% and save. Now you can see we have our grid here. And this grid does take up the entire screen, so I am going to change that a little bit. We don't want it to be so huge. And what we can do is use that container that we provided, this div ID container. So if we style that, the div with ID of container, which we would select just like this, and we can start by just telling it that its maximum width should be, and I think I went for 600 pixels. We can play with that number. And if I refresh now, you can see it's much smaller. So that's part of it. And then let's also center this. So we'll do margin 0 auto. Remember this trick, 0 margin on the top and bottom of the container and auto on the left and right will make it so that it's the same size on either side. And now we have this nice centered grid. All right, and let's do one more thing, which is add our H1 in. So I'm going to have an H1 here, and it's just going to say the great RGB color game, and we'll just start like that. And if we refresh, of course, it's really hard to see. So let's make it white, H1, color white, and save. And we'll start with that. So now let's use some JavaScript. We're going to set JavaScript up to give each one of these a different color. So let's go and make a new file, and we'll call it colorgame.js and save. And like I always want to do, let's add in our alert that says connected. Now let's add the script in. Source equals colorgame.js, save, refresh the page, and we get our connected alert. Okay, so I'll resize the window there. Now let's add the code to give them different colors. So in the end result, in the end game, every time the page loads, it picks 6 random colors, and then it assigns each color to one of the divs. We're going to start without the randomize aspect, and we're just going to assign 6 colors that are always the same, and then we'll move on to randomizing them. So let's go to my colorgame.js, and I'm going to start by making a list of colors, and I'll just call it colors. It's an array. And remember, in our end product, this will be a random list of colors. For now, I'm going to just add some RGBs of my own. So RGB, and I'll start with all red, so 25500. And just to make this legible for you, I will do this all on separate lines. So we'll have 6 of these, and the first one will be all red, and then we'll have another one that's all red and all green, which would make yellow. And then the next one will be 0 red and all green. And then the next one after that will be 0 red, all green, and all blue. And then we'll also do 0 red, 0 green, 255 blue, and then we'll do 255 red, 0 green, 255 blue. And that will give us an array of 6 colors as strings. And then what we want to do is select all 6 of these squares, loop through them, and then assign one of these colors to each one's background. So to loop through, first we need to select. So var, and we'll call it squares, equals document, and we have a lot of choices here. I'm going to use query selector all, so I make sure to get all 6 of them rather than just the first one. And we're going to select based off of the class square. If we had just done div, remember that we have a container div, and we don't want to select that one. We only want these 6 square divs. So dot square, and then we'll loop through for var I equals 0, I less than squares dot length, and I plus plus. Inside of here, we will then say squares I dot style dot background equals, and this is the interesting part, we're going to take that I and use it to access colors. Hey there, this is Colt. I'm here with a little fix that I'm adding after the fact. Just a quick note, it's much preferable to use style.background color. So background color, one word with an uppercase C, rather than style.background, which is what I'm using in this video. So anytime you see style.background, change it to background color. And the reason for that is that it will work in all browsers. Currently, style.background does not work in Firefox. So it technically works in style.background will work in Chrome, for example, just fine, and the game does work. But been getting a lot of questions about what's going on in Firefox, and this is really the main culprit, style.background color. Also, I would like to thank Dell Anderson, one of the students in the discussion forums, for pointing this out most recently. Okay, back to coding. So what we're doing, we have 6 squares, and our I is going to go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that will loop through each square. And then when I get to the first square, I'm going to take 0 and give it the background color of color 0, which is right here. So that will be red. And then we keep going, and we take 1 for the second div, and we give it the second color with index of 1. And we keep doing that until we get to the end. So we're basically going in order that the divs are on the page is the order that they will be colored using these colors from the array. And if we save, refresh, you can see we get our 6 basic colors. So we have red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta. So that's fine for now. We will focus on randomizing colors later. But as a preview, all that we need to do is generate 3 different numbers from 0 to 255, and then we combine them. So it's just 3 different channels, all randomized, and then we make them into one big string with RGB and parentheses around them. But we're going to go with these colors for now. The next thing that we need to do is every time that the page loads, I'll show you here, not only are 6 colors picked, one of those colors is selected to be the goal, or to be the color that we are looking for. So in this case, this is a color that's picked. So we're going to do that as well. And we're going to start by just hard coding it, and then we'll randomize it afterwards. So we're just going to start by saying the goal color is cyan. So that's the 4th color, index of 3. So we'll write the variable here, var picked color equals the colors array index 3. And that will pick cyan, or this color here, RGB 0255 255. And it's a string, remember. Then what we want to do is update our page so that it says that right here, just like we have it here. Obviously not styled the same way, but we want it to say RGB and then in parentheses 0255 255. To do that, we're going to have to change our HTML a little bit. If you can think back to the scorekeeper game where we had an H1 and we are changing the player 1, player 2 scores. Initially, we just had a plain H1, and when we updated it, it automatically overwrote everything else that was in there. But we don't want to do that. We want to keep the text, the, great, and color game, and our color just goes here. But we don't want to have a separate H1 or something because those would go on separate lines. So we're going to use a span, just like we did in the scorekeeper game, and just add in RGB there as a placeholder. So nothing looks different, but if we inspect, you can see we now have a span, which means we can easily select it and manipulate the text. And we're going to give it an ID just to make it even easier. So we'll give it ID, and let's just call it color display. Then we'll go to our JavaScript and select that. So var color display equals document, and we'll do get element by ID just for variety's sake. Get element by ID, and it was color display. And we'll save. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Save the file. And then we want to update color display so that it says this color that we picked. So that's going to be color display dot text content equals picked color, just like that. And we'll refresh. And now we end up with our color here. Great. Let's add the logic now for the click events. So when I click on one of these squares, we want to run some code that's going to figure out which color the square is that we clicked on. And once we have that color, we're going to compare it to the picked color, this one right here. And if they're different, we're going to change the background color of that square so that it goes to the same color as the background of the body. And if they are the same, then that means that the player has won, and we need to do some special things. And if they're different, that means the player picked the wrong color, and we'll also have to handle that. To start, let's add just a plain click event handler that just alerts when we click. So we're going to add an event handler to every single one of the squares, so we can just use the same loop that we have. So I'll add a comment here, add initial colors to squares, and then the next part will be add click listeners to squares. So another one of these, squares I dot add event listener, this time for click, and our callback function, all we'll do is alert clicked a square, and make sure all 6 of them will alert us. All right, click the square. All right, it looks like they all work just fine, just how they need to. So now what we need to do is grab color of clicked square and then compare color to picked color, the variable picked color, which we defined up here. So we'll start. To get that color, remember we can use this. That refers to the item that was clicked on, the square. So we can say this.style.background. And let's just do another alert here. And let's see what we get. So if I click on the red one, it alerts me RGB 25500. And if I click on the cyan one, RGB 0255 So this is working. So what we'll do now is save this to a variable. We'll just call it clicked color, just like that. And then we're going to write an if statement to compare clicked color. So if clicked color triple equals picked color. Nice rhyme there. If that's the case, we will alert correct. And if they don't match with our else, we will alert wrong. Let's give it a shot. Refresh. I click on this one, wrong, wrong. And the true test, if I click on the right one, it says correct. So our logic is working. Even though we don't have any of the random colors in, what we do have is an array of 6 colors that are hard-coded in. And we're assigning a color to each square. And then we're picking, in this case, cyan. And this will be random, of course, but we're picking one color that is our answer. And then we're adding an event listener to every square. When the user clicks on that square or any square, we compare the color of the given square to the picked color. If they match, we do one thing. If they don't match, we do something else. In the next video, we're going to talk about what we actually do if they match and what we do if they don't match.